Welcome back to Think Design Work Smart. I'm Alex Bolboaca and I'm coming at you from the Mozaic Works studios. And what I have for you today is a discussion around AI coding assistants. This discussion has been prompted by Gartner webinar that I watched, and also, of course, but everything that's happening around us. I'm gonna show you some things from this Gartner webinar, and you'll have a link. You can watch it, it's free. I think it's a very interesting topic, and here at Mozaic Works we are very interested in things that can affect systemic change, and actually in systemic change in the flows of software development. So this is why we believe it's a very interesting topic. Now, of course, I'm not gonna be able to discuss everything about this topic. It's something that's in development, it's still progressing, so we need to take all of this into account. But at least we can start a conversation, and actually that's my hope here. I can provide some ideas and then hear from you what you would have to say about this. Let's get started. I'm gonna start from a few statements that I want to examine. I think there's been a lot of hype around LLMs, initially ChatGPT, GitHub Copilot, and now it seems there's more and more tools around this area. They seem to just come up, and there are definitely some questions that we need to ask. But because there's so much hype, and this topic has been modeled with a lot of marketing, wishful thinking, and so on. So we've heard things like AI will replace all programmer jobs. And we'll examine this statement. People who don't know programming can replace programmers using AI assistants. That's another variant of the first one, maybe a bit more mild. But it's like, we are democratizing programming. Everybody will be able to program now because of these assistants, because the assistants will actually do the job for you. And then there's the other extreme, which is AI. These LLMs will not change anything. There's nothing to fear. Just keep on doing whatever you've been doing and forget about all this. So we'll examine all of these, and by the end I'll have a few conclusions. But I have to say, I'm coming from a position of a skeptical stance, because whenever something like this happens that is fundamental, we have to take into account a few things. First of all, there's the hype factor, a lot of investment, a lot of companies. The reason why you see a lot of companies coming up is because a lot of people are throwing money at this, hoping to make some, to get some money back, not necessarily to create a valid product, but often to create a company that maybe is being sold, maybe is being listed at the stock exchange, and they get a huge payday, and then it doesn't matter anymore. So it's not necessarily that the products that are being worked and using AI will actually provide real value, but it is the case that there's a lot of hype surrounding this. And of course, some of them might actually surprise us, and we might see a lot of value coming out of them. I've said before, I've been using ChatGPT and the Bing chat, which is on top of ChatGPT, on top of OpenAI. And my feeling was that it's as good as a junior researcher. It can bring you a lot of useful information together, but you have to know the information to correct it, because it will also give you bad information, wrong information, or information that's not necessarily what you're looking for. In terms of writing, generating essays or articles and so on, the writing style that tends to be generated is pretty boring. In terms of pictures, I know there's been a lot of discussions around deepfakes and so on, but until now, the examples that I've seen on social media just give me that feeling of uncanny valley. I feel that something is not quite right with those images. But I have been using OpenAI to generate images, particularly because I don't know how to draw. I'm not very good at drawing or at creating images, but I have a lot of imagination, and so I can figure out things that I'd like to see. But I realize that they are not very good in terms of quality. They are at best things that I would pass forward to people who are actually good at what they are doing as an example as to what I'm trying to achieve. So if I were to do something like this professionally, let's say build a game, it might be a good idea for me to go in, generate maybe even some of the code, maybe even some of the images and other artifacts using OpenAI, but just as an example for real designers, for people to come in, look at those and say, okay, so we'll redo this from scratch, but we kind of understand where you're coming from and what is your vision. So it's more like this. All right. And so with this being said, I'm coming from a skeptical position, and I'm also coming from a position of a person who wants to understand what will be not only the first level effects, but also the second level effects of introducing AI coding assistants to a developer flow. And here is what has been very interesting with Gardner. Let me quickly show you. These are the slides from the Gardner webinar. And part of it is this, their statements is that the cognitive load on developers is unsustainable. There is enormous amount of enterprise code that is causing barriers in comprehension. And I think that's true, but on the other hand, I think that's true whenever you pass a few hundreds, thousands lines of code. It's very hard for people to maintain full comprehension of something once so it's not necessarily because it's enormous amounts. It can happen even with small amounts. One of the things that I've learned as a programmer in time is that initially you may believe that you can hold a lot of things in your head and you can do a lot of things at the same time. In reality, that's not true. It's best if you stick to one thing at a time and just full focus on that thing and a very small problem at a time, which means that you need to touch just very small pieces of code, which means that you'll have these barriers even with small amounts of code. So it's not a new problem. I think it's even worse than what they are saying here. Increasing number of code dependencies, making problem solving time consuming. Constant switching between coding and searching, which is shattering attention span. And I think that's true. So because of this, what they are saying is we need a coding assistant. But a coding assistant that adapts ideally to our code base, and that lives into the IDE or in your editor, whatever you are using. And I think for this is one thing that I'm all for. Having this type of assistant in your IDE will improve your flow. And this is one of the best things you can do. Right now, many organizations are built around breaking flow. You have a meeting every 45 minutes or so. You have people asking you things on chat. Your phone is ringing and so on. And it's continuously breaking your flow. And if we could, so first of all, there's an organizational problem. Second of all, there's the micro aspect of this, which is switching between searching and coding, which is indeed a big problem. Although I wouldn't say coding, I would say between problem solving and searching, more or less. I'm having a few problems with this. I'm going to show you in a minute. Because once again, going back to the discussion that we had in 3 episodes about performance of programmers, I think that about productivity of programmers, I think they are still missing what productivity is. They keep discussing about productivity here, but I don't think it means what they think it means. So, okay, these are a few things. Let me show you something else. So then this slide comes into place where they are saying there are productivity and satisfaction gains. And this is what I'm referring to. These are reports from 3 companies. And first of all, because these reports come from companies, they are probably skewed. It is what it is. So I'll need to take them with a grain of salt. But here is what they are saying. So tab 9, this is one of the providers, generates about 30% of a user's code. To which what I would have to say is that, okay, is this a good thing? Because from my perspective, it's better if we would have assistants that reduce the number of lines of code that we need to write. In general, it's better if we have lower code than more lines of code. Because of this, I'm not sure if this is something good or not. Maybe it generates 30% of a user's code, but maybe a good programmer would remove like 50% of the whole code, including parts of the generated code. So is this something good? I'm not sure. GitHub Copilot, 74% focus on more satisfying work. So this is more on the level of focus and flow. But the question here is, what is satisfying work for programmers? Because there's one trap you can fall into, which is many programmers would say, I don't like to write tests, so I'm gonna generate all the tests based on the code that I wrote. Now this defeats the purpose of tests, because good tests have 2 goals. One goal is to help with regression, so to avoid regressions in the future when you go back and change code. But the second one is to serve as a second, or actually as a first check on what you are trying to accomplish. If you are writing the test first, basically what you are doing is you are defining the problem that you are solving, and then you write the code based on the tests that you wrote. If what you are doing is instead writing code and then generating the tests, what this will do is it will completely ignore the bugs that you introduced by writing that code and not doing this double check. And because of this, you might introduce actually more bugs because you are moving faster. So is this good? Not sure. It makes people feel better, but it's not always the best thing, right? because some of the problems are difficult and you just can't solve them in a way. The journey to the resolution of problems is not always 100% satisfying. You will end up some places that are not as good, and that's part of the job. And that's actually where you bring the most value. If you can find those pain points, figure them out, fix them in a satisfying manner. The second one is 88% feel more productive. And once again, it's about feeling. And it's good that they feel more productive because this might increase morale and so on. So I'm not saying it's always a bad thing, but once again, what does this mean? I remember an experiment made by, I think, Jason Gorman. What he did was he solved the same problem once using test-driven development and once without test-driven development. And at a large enough distance in time between the two so that he forgot the problem and the solution. And what he noticed is that when he didn't use test-driven development, he felt more productive. Because when you are not using test-driven development, what you feel is that you're always doing something, right? There's always some interesting thing popping up that you need to solve, that you need to debug, that you need to fix, and so on. Whereas if you are doing test-driven development, what you have is you write a small test, you write the smallest piece of code, you refactor, and it kind of goes little by little in a flow, and you might not feel as productive because actually your brain is confusing being productive with being very engaged or active or, solving a lot of problems, being a hero, let's say, approximately. So is this a good thing? It could be for morale, but what does this actually mean? And then there's code whispers. Users were 27% more likely to complete tasks successfully. Okay, so before that, they would stop at some tasks. This is a weird statement. And the second, users were an average of 57% faster. Okay, so this is an average of tasks. And then question is, did they compare the same tasks? It starts the same types of tasks. It starts to get a bit strange here. All right. Now, I don't want you to take only criticism from this because this webinar is actually pretty good. So they are talking a lot about a bunch of things. They are talking about challenges, about mitigation, and so on. But I'm going to leave you the link and you can go there and watch the thing yourself and then, see what you take out of it. Now, here's what I find interesting. So this is my take on all of this. And I thought about how to summarize my thinking around AI coding assistants, and I came up with this model. I have pros, cons, things we need to be careful with, risks, and then what might happen in terms of second-level effects, or at least one of them. This is just an exploration for now. I'm not at all saying this is comprehensive. So pros, I definitely think a smart assistant inside your editor or your IDE improves flow because it will keep you there. It will suggest things to you. And if it's well done, if it's not annoying, because we've seen annoying examples in the past of such assistants, then it can actually improve your flow. You can do more communication with your IDE, more back and forth. And I think this is always a good thing. So there's definitely a huge potential here in terms of micromanaging your time, your personal time. This will allow you to stay in flow longer, and that's great. Reducing task switching, I think that's also something that helps. Although, I'm going to cite another report that we reacted to a few shows ago regarding the fact that some developers were spending actually more time on configuring ChatGPT or the code assistants. I think it was for GitHub Copilot. So configuring GitHub Copilot, then actually producing something useful. So we need to be careful where people will spend their time. Ideally, this will work seamlessly, but honestly, nothing does. So I'm curious to see. And I think another thing here that is a pro, you'll find answers more quickly to typical problems. If somebody has solved that problem in the past, you will find out easier, because the thing is in your IDE, it will suggest you, or you will prompt it, and you'll get some examples, and then you'll be able to fix those examples and so on. Now, what are some of the cons? And these are, some of them you'll also find them in the Gartner webinar, but I think they missed at least one. First of all, these coding assistants can introduce more issues. On one side, it's configuration, making sure it doesn't bother you, doesn't bug you too much, and so on, and that it gives you correct result, or not necessarily correct, but results that are a match for what you are looking for. So it can introduce more issues. In addition to that, it can introduce security issues, performance, and so on. LLMs are not great at the large picture. They are good at figuring out what's the next word, what's the next phrase, what's the next paragraph, so that it looks like something that's correct. This is what LLMs do based on statistics. So they might introduce other types of issues which relate to higher level things: security, performance, scalability, and so on. What might happen is that if you take a too large problem, feed a prompt into ChatGPT or one of the code assistants, you get some code back, you look at it, you realize it's not quite what I need. Change the prompt, generate again, look again, iterate a few times. Question is, wouldn't it be faster to actually write the code yourself? So here it will be a very interesting thing, and finding out which is the right granularity of your prompt so that you optimize for this time spent back and forth. And going back to the things that we are discussing about productivity, it will feel very productive to discuss with ChatGPT and get or Copilot until you get your answer, because you are doing something, and it's presumably it's interesting. It's a mystery to solve. How do I do this so that the assistant will reply with something I actually need. And it's an interesting problem. And it's something I can definitely see developers spending a lot of time on. Without actually getting to the point of solving the problem they were trying to solve. Another challenge that I see, which I'll go back to, is knowledge reduction. Letting more and more things, we'll actually discuss about this here, but if you're using the assistant, you will tend to rely more and more on the assistant, which will reduce your knowledge, which will make you rely more and more on the assistant. So it's a positive feedback cycle that results in you knowing less about the system. And this might prove to be a problem, but we'll get back to it in a moment. You need to also be careful. These are the careful things, and I've touched on these before. Feeling productive versus being productive. You might not feel productive, but actually be productive because you are in a flow. Or you might understand by being productive something else than actually producing solutions to the business problems that you are facing. You might feel productive just playing around with these assistants. And honestly, I can tell you this can happen to me as well. I kind of like chatting with Bing Chat. I find it quite interesting. Also because it's a new thing, right? And we like new toys. And it's interesting to see what it gets right, what it doesn't get right, what sources it uses, and so on. Some things that you find annoying are actually important, like writing tests and the dilution of knowledge. You need to be very careful with this. Now, there are a bunch of risks. First one, copyright issues. These are mostly on organizational level, but you might consider them as a developer as well. Copyright issues. These systems were created from open source code without any compensation. It's also ethics, possibly legal. So they haven't been tested in court yet. And we'll see if they stand the test of courts, or if they will need to pay some more things, or if they need to read, worst case scenario, probably if they will need to rebuild their systems. Now, does it mean that we'll never have, let's say there's a trial and they lose and they need to pay some inordinate amounts of money, they go bankrupt and so on? Does this mean that we won't have AI code assistants? No, I think we'll still have AI code assistants, but it might be that you'll need to train code assistants on your code bases, which might prove a problem for smaller companies because they don't have enough code to train it on. And it will be more difficult to do for large companies because they will need to have some people working on that. But it's something the large companies will do. So I think the genie is out of the box. We will have AI code assistants. The question is in which form? How legal will it be? What will be the limits and the costs of this? There's a possibility for code leaks. Technically, right now, with every one of these assistants, you send your prompt to the cloud servers of the company, of the provider company, and they return the results. What do they do with those queries? And there are now some settings for OpenAI to not include those things that you are sending into their model. But there are still some ramifications because you are sending some of your code to a third party. Okay, and depending on what type of system you are working on, this might be quite a difficult thing or a challenging thing for your organization, or even forbidden. So yeah, we discussed about ethics and possibly legal. There's also the ethical question, right? Did this company steal by using open source code, public posts, public texts, public images, disregarding copyright? I mean, I don't have an answer to that because I'm not a lawyer. So we'll see. And I tend to be very pragmatic about this. It's not so much of what I would do in these situations. It's more about what I know organizations will do. And look, in this industry, organizations tend to do whatever fits their, whatever helps them get an edge. That's the reality for most software organizations. So we'll see how things are in terms of ethics and legality after we will see more conversations and lawsuits happening. That's basically it. What else? Reducing our developers' knowledge of the systems. Yeah, that's something that we discussed before. So now this is what I'm thinking of in terms of second system effects. We have a developer who starts solving tasks using Code Assistant. The developer learns less about the system than before. They start using the assistant for even more things, and this cycle keeps completing, which leads to developers knowing less about the system. So the question is this sustainable? Will LLMs actually evolve to provide enough knowledge of the system? Or will we need to introduce a new role, a type of developer that goes into the system, knows and understands code better than the other developers, and can dig out, kind of like an archaeologist, whatever the name would be, would dig out the information, the knowledge from the code base. So this is what I'm wondering. Will this actually happen? And we don't know. It might happen that LLMs will evolve, or maybe we'll have another jump in AI with different algorithms that will provide better solutions to this kind of problems. Or it might happen that we'll need a new type of developer that digs for knowledge in your code base. So if we go back to the 3 statements, here are my answers, and I'm curious to hear what you think. Will AI replace all programmer jobs? No. I don't think so, but if the only thing you are doing is plumbing, then you might be in trouble, because it might remove repetitive coding tasks. I have seen in organizations, particularly in large organizations, there's a type of developer that takes data from one side of the organization and moves it to another side through APIs. And that type of software development might become more and more automated because honestly, a lot of that is repetitive coding tasks, like building an API based on a few entities, calling other APIs based on existing models, and so on. Deploying those, even the Docker or Kubernetes or whatever you are using, pods. So it might happen that 80% of this goes away because it becomes easier to do. So instead of having 10 developers doing this, you might have 2 developers, each of them using an AI assistant. So if this is the only thing that you are doing, maybe you need to look at improving in some other areas, like maybe prompt engineering. Second statement, people who don't know programming can replace programmers using AI assistants. No, I don't think so. Because complex software systems are much more than code, and LLMs are not good at higher level things like performance, security, scalability, and so on. These still require people to look at. Now, could we have some other types of systems that will filter out some of these issues for us? Maybe. I imagine there are some people working on, for example, creating security tests using LLMs. And that might be a good thing. But on the other hand, what this might mean is that you as a developer will go through a number of different things. Create the code, generate security tests and run them and figure out if there are any issues or scanners or filters and so on. So you still need developers to do these things. LLMs hallucinate, or I found an even better term, confabulate. Basically, they don't create perfect output. You need to change the output. You need to fix it, which means you need to know how to fix it, which means you need to know programming in order to fix it. But with this being said, can somebody who doesn't know programming create a website? There's a static website with what they need. Yes. It will probably have bugs. It will probably miss a bunch of cross-functional things, like maybe it won't be perfect in terms of search engine optimizations, or might have security issues, or so on and so forth. But it might be good enough to start as a prototype, and then somebody else can come in and fix it, improve it, and so on. So this means that at least the first part of product development might become easier, which actually could be a very good thing, because maybe in this way we'll figure out better products. It might also generate a bunch of trash as well. We'll have to see. How about the third one? AI will change nothing. The development flow will definitely change. You'll have a code assistant, most likely in your IDE, in your editor, and you'll be able to collaborate, or you'll be using ChatGPT on the side or something like that to help you as a junior assistant, if not as a coding assistant. So your flow will change, and your flow probably has changed. Question is, what will be the second level effects? Those tend to be the ones that we forget about, and those are the most interesting ones. And I believe there's a big challenge in maintaining our knowledge up to par, to the point where we can actually intervene and solve difficult challenges with our code base when they come up. Right. This will be, I think, the next challenge of our industry. More code is not necessarily better, and if we are generating more code, because if the speed of writing code increases, we'll end up with more code, most likely, which is not always the best thing. But we'll see, because what might also happen is that we'll have other types of second level effects, like you'll use some LLMs for design, you'll use some LLMs for testing, some LLMs for analysis, some LLMs for UX or UI. And then by stringing these together, somehow your flow might become even more different than you might expect. Okay, that's it from me today. I think it's a very interesting problem. I'm very interested in what you think and what you have experienced regarding coding assistants. This is an open topic. I think we'll come back to it pretty soon. So leave us a comment. I love comments. We love to see them. Thank you so much for understanding that I had to delay this video a little bit. I hope you will still find it very interesting. Thank you kindly for the view, and until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart.